Welcome to Motion Deep Dive. Unravel the magic behind the screen.
Okay, so giant robots in space, yeah. But not the bright and shiny kind of anime you might be thinking of.
Definitely not.
No, we're talking like gritty war drama kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Where even the supposed good guys, you're not really sure about them. And get this, the enemy's new Gundam. It's basically like a straight-up slasher villain.
Yeah, it's pretty terrifying.
It's wild. So that is Mobile Suit Gundam. Requiem for Vengeance. That's what we're looking at today.
That's right.
We've got a ton of reviews and forum threads. Fans are going nuts for this.
Oh, yeah, they're very passionate.
So we're going to try and figure out what makes Requiem for Vengeance so interesting, even if, you're not like a Gundam expert. You haven't seen every single series. You know what I mean?
Right.
One of the things that immediately grabs you, it's the setting. Like right off the bat, instead of the usual Earth Federation perspective, the good guys, we're thrown right into Zeon, the bad guys, during the 1-year war, the original conflict.
And what's so fascinating is we're not just seeing the war from the other side. We're experiencing it through the eyes of these Zeon soldiers who are really struggling. With the reality of what war actually is.
Yeah, it's definitely not a hero's journey. Like, no, we're dealing with trauma, like the psychological toll, the moral gray areas, when you're fighting a war this brutal. I mean, can you even call yourself the good guys?
Right. And that moral ambiguity, it's a big part of why this series is so compelling. I mean, it really makes you question those assumptions, right? Like who's right and who's wrong.
Yeah.
Especially in Gundam, where those lines have usually been so clear.
Totally. Now, speaking of blurred lines, we got to talk about Aria Solari, our main character. She's a Zeon captain, top-tier pilot, flies a Zaku, and get this, she's a new type. So we're talking like elite pilot, psychic powers, the whole 9 yards.
But she's not just some emotionless super soldier. What really makes Iria interesting is her humanity. I mean, she's fighting to survive, of course, but she wants to get back to her son. And the things that she sees, the things she has to do, it really weighs on her. Nightmares, she questions everything. Her internal struggles, that's what makes her so different.
It's like those stories about soldiers dealing with PTSD. It's taking that real human experience and putting it into this sci-fi war setting.
For sure.
And then on the other side of the battlefield, you've got the Gundam EX, the Federation's shiny new mobile suit.
Yeah.
And this thing is pure nightmare fuel. Critics are calling it a slasher movie villain. And I gotta say, I can see it.
It's really interesting how they flip the script here. Usually the Gundam is like the symbol of hope, right? The good guy's weapon. But here, it's this relentless, unstoppable force. And for a big chunk of the series, we don't even know who's piloting it.
Adds to the whole horror vibe, right? This faceless, unstoppable monster.
Why do you think they decided to portray the Gundam this way?
Well, I think it goes back to that moral ambiguity we were talking about. The Gundam EX, it represents that cold, technological side of war. No mercy, no compassion. Like almost a metaphor for how war turns even the most advanced tech into something terrifying.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So morally complex protagonist fighting for her life against this terrifying, almost inhuman enemy. And then you throw in the animation style. That's another thing that's getting a lot of attention. Requiem for Vengeance is all CG.
Yeah, and that's where opinions start to differ. I mean, on the one hand, the mechs, the environment's super detailed, very realistic, battles look amazing. But then, the human characters, that's where it gets tricky. Reviews are all over the place. Some people are praising it, trying something new, pushing boundaries, all that. But others are pointing out that uncanny valley thing.
It's like they nail the robots, but the people still need some work. The movements can be stiff. Facial expressions don't always match what they're saying.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they improve the CG as the show goes on. But even with that, there's no denying that Requiem for Vengeance is doing something different with Gundam. And one of the biggest things is how they flip the script on Zeon.
Right. Instead of the classic villains, we're seeing them as the underdogs, the ones fighting a losing battle. But, and this is important, the series isn't trying to make them the good guys.
It's not a simple reversal, no. They're still driven by anger, by vengeance. They make bad choices, still flawed.
Exactly. And that's what's so interesting. They're forcing us to confront the fact that even the supposed bad guys, they have their reasons, their motivations, their own stories. You have to see it from a whole new angle.
It's like they're saying, hey, remember those bad guys? Let's get inside their heads, see the war through their eyes.
Precisely.
Morally complex protagonist, terrifying enemy Gundam, and a whole lot of moral gray areas to think about.
It's really interesting picking up on that whole Zeon as the underdogs thing. It's really fascinating how they handle that shift.
Yeah, I mean, for longtime Gundam fans, seeing Zeon, usually the bad guys, in this kind of light, it must be pretty wild.
Oh, it's definitely a bold move, and you see it in the reactions. Some fans, they love it. It's challenging the old narrative. But then you got others, they're a bit worried, like, is this going to be too sympathetic? To a faction that, let's be real, started a pretty brutal war.
Right, but it's not like they're trying to rewrite history or make
Mhm.
Zeon into these innocent victims.
No, no, not at all. You still see that ruthlessness, the desire for revenge. They made some questionable choices.
Yeah, and they're not, perfect. They're not without their flaws. It's like, even when you're rooting for the underdog, you got to remember there are no easy answers in war.
Absolutely. And that's something this series does really well, reminding us that there's always more to the story than what you see at first glance.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
So, we've got our morally complex main character, a terrifying enemy Gundam, and a whole new way of looking at Zeon. And then there's that ending, the one that everyone is talking about.
Oh, that ending. Yeah, that's definitely a point of contention, you could say. Without spoiling anything, it's not your typical everything tied up in a neat little bow kind of ending.
The forum threads, they are blowing up. Some people, they hate it. They're saying it doesn't give you closure. Like, what happens to Aria? Where does she go from here?
But here's the thing, right? The people who dislike it, they're focused on that lack of resolution. They want a clear victory. Good guys win, bad guys lose, justice is served. But others, they see that lack of resolution as the point.
It's true. Real wars, they don't always end neatly. The consequences, the trauma, it sticks around even when the fighting stops.
Exactly. It's an ending that stays with you, makes you think about the war, the impact, long after it's over.
Yeah, I can see how that would be frustrating for some viewers, but also thought-provoking. It's not giving you answers, it's making you feel the weight of all those unanswered questions.
For sure.
Another thing that's been dividing viewers is that CG animation style. We touched on it earlier, but maybe we could go a little deeper, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the use of CG in Requiem for Vengeance, it's a bold experiment. And it's, like you said, a mixed bag.
On the one hand, the mecha designs are amazing, so detailed the way they move, and those battle sequences, man, they're epic.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
the CG really shines in those huge action scenes. The level of detail, the realism, you just wouldn't get that with traditional animation.
But then you get to those close-ups, characters talking face to face, that's when things start to, I don't know, fall apart a little.
The uncanny valley, it's definitely there. Movements can be stiff, and the faces, sometimes they just don't quite match the emotions.
It's like two different shows. You've got these incredible robot battles, and then it cuts to a scene with two people just talking, and it feels off.
It's a jarring contrast, for sure. And it shows the difficulty of using CG for characters. It's one thing to make robots look real, but making them feel human, expressing those subtle emotions, that's a whole other challenge.
It's like the series is pushing the limits of CG, but it's also showing us where the technology falls short, at least for now.
It's an interesting experiment. I think it'll be really interesting to see if this influences future Gundam projects. Will they stick with CG or go back to traditional animation?
Time will tell. But you know what everyone agrees on? Whether they like the animation or the ending, the sound design is fantastic.
Oh, the audio in Requiem for Vengeance is top-notch. It's like the one thing that unites everyone. Fans, critics, everybody.
The composer, Wilbert Roger II, he's mostly known for his video game work, and he brings this really unique style.
Yeah, the music is haunting, atmospheric. It fits the tone of the story perfectly, especially the choral pieces. They add this sense of, like, grandeur and tragedy to all the events.
And the sound effects are amazing. Those mechs moving, the engines, metal clashing in battle. It's so visceral, so real.
You really feel the power of those giant robots. The sound really helps you understand how massive and impactful they are. It's like you're right there in the cockpit with the pilots.
Even if the visuals aren't perfect, the sound design just pulls you right into the world of Requiem for Vengeance. Like you can feel the heat of those explosions, the ground shaking.
They really paid attention to detail, creating this immersive soundscape. And it really elevates the whole thing. It's a huge part of what makes it so good.
Okay, so we've talked about the ending, the animation, and the sound. But what about the performances? The English voice acting?
Oh, the dub is great. They really brought a lot of emotion and depth to the characters. It connects with you.
Celia Massingham, who voices Uria, she's phenomenal. She really captures Iria's strength. her vulnerability, that whole internal struggle. It's amazing.
It's such a nuanced performance. You can hear the weight of everything Aria's gone through in her voice, the physical and emotional toll, like you're hearing the war changing her.
And the rest of the cast, they're all great too. They bring those supporting characters to life, even the ones that, on paper seem a little stereotypical.
Yeah, the voice acting really grounds the story, makes the characters feel real and relatable, even though they're, flying giant robots and fighting in space.
It's like they're reminding us, even in this crazy setting, it's still the human element that matters, the emotions, the relationships, all that.
Absolutely.
Another thing I noticed, the voice cast is really diverse.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It shows that they're really trying to represent more voices, more perspectives. And I think that's a good thing. It's a step in the right direction for the franchise, for anime as a whole.
Yeah, it's good to see them making that effort, both in the characters and the actors who play them.
For sure.
What's the bigger picture here? What does Requiem for Vengeance tell us about where Gundam is going in the future?
I think one of the most important things about Requiem for Vengeance is how it really dives into that, psychological impact of war, the trauma, not just on one person, but like on everyone, on society.
It's not just giant robots blowing stuff up, right? It makes you think about the real cost of war, the damage it does long after the fighting's over.
Uria's story is a perfect example. I mean, she sees some awful things, and she has to do some things she doesn't want to do. And it's not just about, like, living or dying. It's about, can she stay human after all that?
It's like those stories you hear about soldiers coming home with those hidden wounds.
Yeah.
The show really captures that, those inner battles, trying to figure out what's right and wrong, that psychological impact that war has.
Exactly. And it's something that people connect with, It doesn't matter if you've seen every Gundam show or if this is your first one. It's about loss, grief, how do we deal with the choices we made when things were really bad? Those are universal experiences.
So even though it's, robots and space and all that, Requiem for Vengeance, it's really about being human. What makes us tick? What makes us question ourselves? How do we cope when bad things happen?
For sure.
And we got to talk about, focusing on Zeon's side of things.
Right.
That's pretty different for Gundam. Usually it's all about the Earth Federation.
It's a risk.
Yeah.
But it really take off, I think. I mean, people are talking about it. It's a whole new way to look at Gundam. You're seeing things from the enemy's perspective. You got to rethink everything you thought you knew.
Like, whoa, those guys I thought were the bad guys, now I see what they're going through. It's not so simple.
And that opens up a whole world of stories for Gundam. So many untold stories from that side, so many perspectives we haven't seen yet. This is just the beginning, really.
I'd love to see like a whole series about a Zeon squad just trying to survive the 1-year war. Their own struggles, their own stories, mixed in with all the bigger stuff going on. That would be awesome.
I'd watch that.
But we can't forget about the elephant in the room, that CG animation. We've been talking about it a lot. And honestly, I think it could really change Gundam forever, for good or bad.
Yeah, the CG in Requiem for Vengeance, it's a tough one. I mean, on one hand, you have these incredibly detailed mechs.
Yeah.
And those battles, wow, they're just visually stunning.
I know what you mean, that scene where the Gundam EX takes on like a whole squad of Zeon mobile suits. It's insane, like a Hollywood movie.
Exactly. But then those close-ups on the characters, ugh, that uncanny valley thing, it's real.
Yeah, the technology isn't quite there yet. The subtle expressions, those little human things, it's just missing.
And that's something all of anime is struggling with, right? How do you make CG characters that really feel alive, that have those emotions we're used to seeing in, traditional animation?
It's still early days. And Requiem for Vengeance, it's part of figuring all that out.
They're pushing the boundaries, making the industry try new things. That's got to be a good thing in the long run.
It's like, okay, maybe we have to deal with some weird-looking faces for now. But if it leads to a future where CG can really do what hand-drawn animation can do, well, maybe it's worth it.
Maybe.
So now that we've reached the end, all I can think is, what's next? What's Requiem for Vengeance's legacy going to be?
It's a turning point. That's how I see it. This show, it wasn't afraid to try new things, shake things up, tell new kinds of Gundam stories.
We learned that there are still new stories to tell in Gundam, even after all these years, all these shows.
And it reminds us that when you get down to it, Gundam is about us, about humans, the choices we make, what happens because of those choices, and how we stay human even when everything is going wrong.
So to everyone listening, as you think about Requiem for Vengeance, ask yourselves, what stuck with you? Did it change how you see Gundam? Did it make you think differently about war, about humanity, about yourself?
And maybe the most important question, what do you want to see in the future of Gundam?
Because one thing's for sure. After Requiem for Vengeance, anything is possible. And that brings us to the end of this deep dive. Until next time, keep watching, keep thinking, and keep diving deep.